Tom Cruise stands out as one of the most enduring action stars in modern cinema, rivaling even the iconic status of Arnold Schwarzenegger. While Schwarzenegger defined the larger-than-life action hero of the 80s and 90s, Cruise has carved out a legacy built on consistency, longevity, and an evolving physical commitment to his craft that spans decades. Cruise's action credentials began in earnest with Top Gun in 1986, where his portrayal of Maverick combined charisma with high-octane aerial sequences. From that point onwards, he steadily built a filmography dominated by action-driven narratives. Unlike many actors who transition in and out of genres, Cruise has remained remarkably consistent, anchoring blockbuster franchises such as Mission Impossible, where he performs many of his own stunts ranging from scaling skyscrapers to hanging off aircraft mid-flight. This dedication reinforces his authenticity as an action star and sets him apart in an era increasingly reliant on digital effects. In comparison, Schwarzenegger's appeal largely stemmed from his imposing physique and commanding screen presence, which defined classics like The Terminator and Predator. Cruise, on the other hand, represents a different kind of action hero, less about sheer size and more about agility, precision, and relentless energy. Yet both actors share a commitment to physical performance and spectacle, making their films synonymous with the action genre. What is perhaps most remarkable about Cruise is his longevity. Decades after Top Gun, he reprised his role in Top Gun Maverick in 2022, demonstrating not only that he has maintained his physical abilities, but also that he continues to embody a youthful, daring spirit. His films remain heavily action-orientated, and he continues to push boundaries well into his later career, something few actors achieve at such a high level. Ultimately, Tom Cruise deserves to be mentioned alongside guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Van Damme, Stallone, etc., as a defining action star. Whereas I wouldn't really say the same for guys like Mel Gibson or Bruce Willis, all illnesses aside, because although they did do genre-defining action classics like Lethal Weapon and Die Hard, they didn't maintain the physical abilities that Tom Cruise has right up to the present day, and also they did tend to have other movies that defined their career, whereas Tom Cruise, the majority of his movies have been action-based, and even the ones that don't, such as some of the psychological thrillers and dramas, even they have had the usual scenes in there with him doing his classic running. You might be watching one of his films such as The Firm, which is in no way an action movie, yet you just know at some point you're going to be watching it and it's going to be, and he's off. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. Not just Tom Cruise running, that would be a bit weird. That doesn't work. But we're just going to talk about how Tom Cruise has sustained a run of action films committed to physical performance and ability to adapt while maintaining a core identity, which has ensured him a place in action cinema history. He is an action star. So we're here today, Brand X Reviews, and we have the core very briefly.
Yes.
So what it is, right? You know, with our kind of stance on action movies, we kind of look at action stars and we kind of categorise them in terms of certain guys like Mel Gibson and Bruce Willis. We would kind of say they aren't action stars in the same sense as like Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Dwayne Johnson, because those guys, the greater body of their work is in action stuff, and they've brought something to their career that is very physical, whether they're into sports or bodybuilding or whatever. and they've maintained that through the decades. They haven't just kind of like dabbled, even though like Bruce Willis did like iconic stuff. He's not like a tough guy as such, and he's done a lot of films, a lot of career-defining films that haven't been that. I'm thinking,
Yes.
what I'm kind of running by you is Tom Cruise is not really somebody that we would kind of put up there with like Van Damme, Stallone, and all that. But if you think about it, he started in the 80s with like a huge action movie, which was Top Gun, and he's maintained his physical abilities doing his own stunts right up to the present day, and he's been very consistent with that. And although he's done like other movies like Rain Man and so on, a lot of it has been mixed in with like action movies, even if it's like sci-fi films like Oblivion. I'm just looking at my collection, and obviously Jack Reacher and Mission Impossible movies, like all through the decades, all that kind of stuff. Minority Report, all those films. It just kind of makes me think, although we wouldn't look at him in the same sense as we would like Stallone and so on, he kind of does like deserve like action star status. Do you know what I mean? What do you think about
I mean, I kind of agree, but I think I'm trying to think how best to put this into words.
that? I'm mixed as well.
It's not just that like they've kept the like the physicality up, and they've been in a lot of action like based films. For me, I think it's a little bit more like they're not just that. Like it's very hard to like find like a film that like say Schwarzenegger has done that hasn't been some kind of like action film. Like he's been in some, but it's not really like what he's known for. Whereas I think some actors, like you're saying, like Tom Cruise, like are a bit more like they've had very big films that haven't been action, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a weaker sort of dilution than somebody like Stallone or Van Damme or so on, but I think
Mm.
he's close to being up there, closer than a hell of a lot of other actors. And like I say, he's had something that even like guys like I say like Mel Gibson, you can't say like about him, even though he did like Lethal Weapon, and that's more of a classic action movie than in a way a lot of the stuff that Tom Cruise did. But the point about the action star thing is the sort of the consistency of it, and the fact that they did a lot of these movies that were kind of genre defining. You can kind of say Keanu Reeves, but maybe not as much because he's had like spent a bit of time out. He's kind of had like bursts, whereas Tom Cruise is like I say had that consistency. And I think as well with Keanu Reeves, like yeah, he does like a lot of his like stunts and so on, but it's not quite the same as Tom Cruise. So yeah, it's a weird one. I don't know how I feel about that. It just doesn't feel right putting him up there, with a lot of those guys. But I think maybe as an honorary kind of role, I don't know how it works. It's definitely an odd one. One thing I'll just
Mm.
say as well, I'll let you. Have you any other thoughts on that?
No, nothing major.
Yeah, it was just a quick insert into this video, but one thing I was going to mention, I was saying this, I might have mentioned it to you before, but with like the Mission Impossible movies, it's kind of weird if you look at the timescale of it, because those have spanned like 30 years. It started in 96, which was around the time GoldenEye came out, which was a James Bond film, obviously, in 95. That was Pierce Brosnan's first film. And I remember, and you'll remember, going to see that film when it came out. And at the time, James Bond had been around for about 30 years, and Sean Connery was like an old guy. Obviously, he was in like The Rock, but that was an anomaly because he was like an old guy. Kind of James Bond like. There's some arguments that say that he's actually James Bond in that film, but separate issue. It's kind of weird because now we're 30 years after that, so we're now where Sean Connery was in the mid 90s with Tom Cruise. But yeah, Tom Cruise is like still legitimately playing the same character and the same kind of like vibe to him that he had in the original. Obviously, he's not as fresh faced, but it's kind of weird because you didn't have that with Sean Connery. You didn't have him playing James Bond for 30 years up until the 90s and still doing all his stunts and so on. He was an old guy at that point. Whereas like Tom Cruise hasn't really aged in the same way, and he's doing his own. He's not like movie magic because he's doing his stunts. It's bizarre. So thought I'd mention that anyway. I'll leave it there, but I thought this would be an interesting video, and I just thought I'd insert the core. Any thoughts on that?
No.
I thought you were going to say we inserted the toe for the sink. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. It's not a particularly highbrow video that we're making here, but yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for watching.
Air Force One was waiting for us. Pilots, best looking human beings I've ever seen. Even better looking than Tom Cruise, and he's a friend of mine, okay? These guys were central casting, and they could also fly.